All right. So, Cathy Folkes, my good friend Cathy. Hi, how are you today? Happy Monday.
Good. Happy Monday.
It's always fun to talk to you. I was thinking about just in prep for this. We've worked together now in some form or fashion for almost a decade, which is interesting to think about.
Yep.
Uh, and been around each other in, like I said, different capacities on the same team, working in companies that kind of work together, seeing each other at conferences for a period, and now back together as a part of the team with your role as the chief data officer for RKD Group. And I wanted to have a conversation with you around the last couple of months and this elevated awareness of data security, specifically on the heels of the incident with Blackbaud, but more so about just the ideas of data security and data risk. But before we get down the road on that, would love it if you would take just a moment and talk about your journey and what that path looked like to lead you into the world of nonprofit marketing and fundraising.
Sure. So I finished college working in social responsibility. So it was something I had a passion for, thinking I'd go to work for some big company working in social responsibility. And just about the time I was finishing school, we ended up in a depression. The economy fell through and nobody cared about social responsibility at all. It was, can we pay our staff? About the same time, I met a woman who was doing a lot of work in politics who was looking for some help managing data for political campaigns. So I started out doing quite a bit of work for some senators and congressmen, as well as some nonprofits with her, working around databases in the early 80s. And a lot of what we were doing was trying to replicate the work that was done on mainframes in PCs, which were fairly new. So, working with giant floppy disks and printers that were as big as my desk, that cost 5 times as much as my computer now to do work around nonprofits and political campaigns, basically just moving off of the mainframe and into an environment that was a lot more affordable for people. It was a crazy time, very different from now, for sure.
And in some ways, probably similar to now, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we're still looking at a lot of the same data. We're trying to do the same things, but boy, we can do a lot more with the data and so much faster. And if I think about how long it took to do things back then, or even in the 90s, we just completely surpassed everything by far. So, yep.
Yeah. In the last 2 years, maybe a year and a half or 2 years, you and I have we presented together on the role of data strategy, and data strategy being the hero that organizations should look to. Like, that should be the priority in terms of your strategic planning, is forming a culture around data strategy. And as we move into talking about risks around data management, I would love for you to spend just a moment talking about why data strategy needs to be the hero and why that's more important now than ever.
Sure. I think it is even more important now. Things move so quickly. We need to be able to react to them. Um, and when we talk about data as the hero, I consider data as the hero, a trusted data that I would say it's delivered at the right time, right? So I have it when I need it and I trust it, which is really hard for a lot of nonprofits these days. So getting a report or analyzing data and saying, oh, I believe this and I can use it and I can go act on it is hard. But it's also the powerhouse of really being able to make the right decisions and the right decisions quickly. So, that hero can really be a hero if I can get my data into a place where I have it, as soon as I need it, and I believe what it says. And that's the hard part, I think, right now is getting it when you need it and having it in a place and in a format that's trusted and reliable. Yep.
Yeah, trusted and reliable, and being able to leverage it as quickly as possible, which I think is a nice segue into the real reason why we're here, which is to talk about data security. So I want to rewind to, I believe it was July 16th. Hundreds of nonprofits across the globe received this notice of a ransomware attack on Blackbaud. What exactly do we know about what happened on or around July 16th?
Yeah, so we know that for 6 to 8 weeks, maybe even longer before that, that someone had been working their way inside of Blackbaud's environment. And they've been doing it very slowly and very methodically. And we're basically able to get all the way inside of the place where they store clients' data that they work on, not the client's data itself, but data that they pass on to Blackbaud to do operational work. To the point where they basically were able to keep anybody else from using that data. So it took a long time, and it was a very professionally and very well managed process to get in there. On July 17th, Blackbaud let everybody else know that what had happened to the data, that they had actually been held for ransom and that they had paid that ransom for the attack. So in order to make sure that their clients were still able to do business, they actually paid the ransom, which could have caused other problems, but there's pros and cons on both sides. And they let the clients know that this had happened, and in the ransomware attack, they had also obtained quite a bit of data. It included things like donor information, student information. In some cases, it included driver's license numbers, educational, academic information, and employment information. So while it wasn't considered social security numbers or PII, it was still pretty valuable information that they were able to obtain. At that point, Blackbaud has assured their clients that they received a proof of or certificate of destruction that the data has been destroyed, but they've also hired somebody to watch the dark web for eternity, basically, because we all know that sometimes things sit on a shelf for a long time and they may not appear for a long time after a hack occurs. And so they also have someone in place that's going to watch in case anything ever does occur where the data seeps back out again. Yeah.
Incredibly unfortunate.
Yeah.
And you and I were talking about, at the beginning of this, that, it's not like in, July 16th, 17th, or the 6 to 8 weeks prior, that was the first time that something like this has happened, right? This has been an ongoing risk and topic of conversation. It's just that there's a spotlight on this because of the size of it and the notoriety of Blackbaud, obviously, as the person who fell victim to such a ransomware attack. And in some ways, it gives me thoughts and feelings of thinking back on Target's data breach, some 10, 15 years ago, that brought, it shed a light on the need for certain risk and prevention elements around data and cybersecurity. And so maybe we're at the same place again. But I noticed it because of seeing how some nonprofits were responding. What have you seen in terms of what the nonprofit decision makers have done since then in terms of a response to what exactly happened?
So I think a couple of things, certainly a risk reassessment. So, anything like this, unfortunately, makes us all think again that this could happen to anybody at any time. We all work really, really hard to make sure our data is protected and we follow the rules, but these are criminals, right? And they're looking for a way into systems all day long. That's their full-time career. So I think some of that is just making sure we understand that the data is secure, where we're managing it. I think people are reassessing where they put data and how they share it with third parties. And there are some people that are looking for other environments that they might feel more comfortable or they can control since this has occurred. So I think, though, that it does make us aware, again, just like the Target issue, that we're all at risk. Giant companies, even Experian has been hacked, Target's been hacked. The Chronicle of Philanthropy was just hacked a few months, recently as well. So, we all can fall to the crimes. So it's a matter of being aware of what you're doing and how you're reacting. And I know, Justin's one thing I keep saying, but, in an issue like this, your number one asset is reaction time. So, if you can react to it and let your donors or your members, whoever it is, know sooner rather than later, it's going to be your number one asset. Obviously, there's things we can't ever control, but understanding how you communicate with them and let them know, what's happened and protecting them is really important in a time like this as well.
So and certainly that time and response, it can create reassurance for many, right? Or the opposite, just depending on how that sort of thing plays out. You touch on this a little bit, but would love for you to expand. So so we talked about like what some nonprofits are doing. What should they be doing? Assuming that some may be taking certain steps and others may be taking another set of steps. What exactly should nonprofits be doing in response to this? Whether or not they're a Blackbaud, user, I don't think that matters. It's more about what should nonprofits in general be looking at, evaluating, and learning from what's happened here with Blackbaud and its customer base to lay out their priorities. What should be prioritized?
Right. So I think number one is to make sure that you have a documented sort of risk assessment plan. So, what does your organization do in the instance of this happens? And does everybody know what that is? And one of the things that caught Experian short when they had their hack was that their phone tree was out of date. So you don't think about simple things like this, but making sure you know who's supposed to communicate, when they're supposed to communicate, and can you find everything or everyone, because this could happen at any time. It could happen in the middle of a Saturday night, and suddenly you need to find people. So, and then I think just addressing what happened, making sure that internally and externally, so you've got your donors, your board members, making sure that people understand how it's affected your organization. And then, messaging that reassures donor that you're doing everything to make sure they're protected, that you're reacting, you're working with whoever's managing the data, and just making sure that, your first response is to protect them and any data you might have. And then I think understanding who should be communicating this, right? Because it can also go awry if everybody's trying to communicate at once. You need to make sure you have a central point of communication and messaging, right? It's not that anybody would say anything on purpose that would sort of make the message harder to digest in different places, but you really want to make sure it's a single message point, and has been communicated. A lot of, during the Blackbaud issue, there were a lot of nonprofits that have been, the press has talked to them. They want to know what's going on. There's been some regional press, even in Vermont, where they, went to several organizations and said, what are you doing? And the truth is, I think the press actually helped some of them respond better and with a single voice, because the press got to them so quickly. But, understanding what that message is and who's allowed to communicate is really, really important. And then I think with that same point, understanding who's going to be fielding questions and making sure they sort of have a message map or an understanding of, how to respond to questions. What are you going to do? What are next steps? Is there anything that's going to happen? The other thing around that we're finding through this is that some donors have been asking to see what information you have in their database. So I think it's also really important to evaluate that. And, my rule of thumb is always never keep anything in your database that you wouldn't be willing to share with your donors. I know that makes some people squeam a little bit, but I think it's really important. You're not legally responsible to share that information, but it's a trust issue again, right? You have a major donor who wants to know what you have in their system and what you've managed. I think we're seeing more and more of that coming out of this Blackbaud hack. Oh my gosh, they got my information. What is it that they got? So there is that process happening as well. And then understanding a process as those questions are coming in, right? Where do they go? How are they being managed inside of your organization? If somebody asks, what's your response and how quickly can you respond to them? And then lastly, I think, making sure you're involved with whoever your cyber insurance firm is or whoever's protecting your data. You also want to make sure that whatever your message is not going to put you out of scope of what your insurance is. You need to be really careful as you're dealing with the data and the messaging that you're working side by side with them, because, they want to make sure that what you're doing is going to, ensure that you're going to continue to be covered and your communicating what they have also provided for you as well.
There's
I know
so
that was a
much of
lot.
that. There's so much there, Cathy, and there's a lot of it though. I mean, 80% of what you just shared is the basics of crisis communication. And sometimes it's the basics that are overlooked in terms of having a true assessment of what happened and then being able to establish a point of view and deliver, ideally through a single person, a single message. Like that's,
right.
Kind of crisis communication 101, identifying the person, the channels, who's going to be fielding those questions, what's the process or flow for answering the question. So there's a part of it that's just being a smart communicator. And then there's a part of it that's also backed into, as you started this conversation around data strategy, and the trust factor that's indicative of you being a good steward of data. Right. So being prepared.
Right. So be prepared before, knowing that this could always happen. Exactly. That my organization has a plan for what happens should we be hacked. Right. That's something your donors can really appreciate. So if something like this happens, that can be part of your communication. We have a plan. Our boards have been involved with the plan. We reevaluate it every year to make sure it's true. I think those are all things that help your donors think at least you're trying everything you can to protect them. Yep.
Yeah, and certainly in the context of everything that we've dealt with in 2020, now is not the time to be caught without a plan, right? That we can activate, right? So I think that all of those make sense. But then the other thing that I would say or ask, Cathy, is that this isn't the first time this has happened. We identified that. These things happen and probably happen more frequently than we're comfortable with knowing about. And it's not the last time that it's going to happen. So, here we are in August having this conversation. Many folks are still wrestling with how to navigate current circumstances around, mid or post COVID and how that impacts their business strategy, their operational strategy, their program strategy. And so now you have this element of refreshing your risk management procedures. What do you think it ultimately means? So if you're sitting across from chief technology officer, chief information officer for a nonprofit, whether or not they're local or regional or national, what would you tell them walking away to do immediately? What's their next best step to get going down the road of being prepared for this?
So the number one, I would say, make sure you know where all your data is. And that's a really hard thing for a lot of organizations these days. So we don't, in a lot of cases, know where it all is. Understanding, what third-party vendors I use to share data, understanding who keeps names and addresses in Excel, all of those things, because you can't even do a good risk assessment unless you know where all those pieces are. And, I know we all trust our employees and our partners, but just making sure that's documented inside of the organization, I'd say, is number one.
Yeah.
Because,
and oftentimes that's the most complicated step, right? Like that first step and identifying, getting your arms around all of the data. But as you said, these assessments and starting there, not only is it's not a one-time practice, but getting it right now helps us be prepared, and then also helps us get down the path of making it, whether or not that's an annual review and audit or something that's more frequent, so that we can stay on top of these things.
Yeah, no, it's a very basic data governance practice that really helps in anything like this, because what you don't want to do is have something like this happen and have somebody else call you and let you know that your data is someplace you didn't even know where it was, or was, being able to react quickly doesn't happen if you don't know where the data was that was attacked, right? So you got to find all those places. Yep.
Awesome. All right, Cathy, those are incredibly helpful tips, and it helps us stay on top of what exactly has happened and then what we should be thinking about going forward. And so thanks for taking some time this afternoon just to walk through that with me. And that way we can help our friends be prepared And so just in closing, if someone wants to get in touch with you and figure out, if there are ways for them to be better prepared or to map out what a risk management plan would look like or understand their data governance policies, how can someone get in touch with you? Where can they find you?
So they can find me at rkdgroup.com and put a contact in through there, or can get me personally through Folks at rkdgroup.com. I'd love to talk to you if you feel you've got a challenge and you need some help.
Awesome. Cathy, you're the best. It's good to see you today.
Thanks, Justin. Talk to you later.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.